All right, so we are starting today with the very end of the Vamana Avatar story and the very end of book 8. We're probably going to start book 9 today of Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana. We are starting with discourse 23 in book 8, which is entitled Freed from Bondage, Bali enters the region of Sutala. Sri Shuka resumed, to Lord Vishnu, the most ancient person in the form of a dwarf, who had spoken thus, who had just spoken in great praise of Mahabali Sura, promising him guaranteed moksha at the end of the coming Manvantara, during the whole of which he will rule as Indra. The magnanimous Bali, who was esteemed by all pious souls, submitted with joined palms and in a faltering voice, his eyes dimmed with drops of tears and his throat choked with emotion. Bali said, "Oh, a sincere effort made to bow low at your feet is found intent on securing the boon sought for by devotees that have sought you. For by that endeavor has been vouchsafed to a vile asura, such as myself, that favor of yours which was never obtained before by the guardians of the worlds and other devas." Sri Shuka continued, having spoken thus and bowed low to Sri Hari and then to Brahma the creator, along with Lord Shiva, the source of the universe, Bali, who was now free from bondage and full of delight, got ready to retire to Sutala, the third region, the third of the Tala Lokas, below the earth, accompanied by the Asuras. Having thus restored the kingdom of Svarga to Indra and fulfilled the desire of Aditi, the Lord ruled over the universe as a younger brother and protector of Indra. In other words, Vamana became one of the Adityas. Seeing his grandson Bali, who maintained the thread of his line, free from all bondage and a recipient of the Lord's grace, Prahlada, who was steeped in devotion, spoke to the Lord as follows. Prahlada submitted, "To think that you, whose feet are adored even by those that deserve the adoration of the universe, should play the governor of a fort to us Asuras. Neither Brahma the creator, nor Sri, your divine spouse, nor even Lord Shiva, the destroyer of the universe, has ever won such unique grace. How then could those others, Indra and so on, do so? By virtue of addiction to the honey of your lotus feet, Brahma and others enjoy opulence and powers of various kinds, O Lord, affording shelter to all. We are at a loss to understand wherefore we, those born of a wicked race and following evil ways, should have been made the recipients of your gracious look. Oh, in your case, who have released the world through the sportful activity of your inconceivable creative energy, are omniscient, nay, the very self of all, and therefore regard all with the same eye, a discriminating disposition in the sense that you are fond of your devotees is a wonderful gesture. You exhibit the essential characteristic of a wish-yielding tree, which fulfills the desire of those who betake themselves to it." The glorious Lord replied, "Prahlada, dear, may all be well with you. Depart to Sutala, and rejoicing there with your grandson, bring delight to your kinsfolk. You will always behold me stationed there, mace in hand. You will have your ignorance wiped out by the infinite joy induced by my darshana." Sri Shuka went on, accepting the Lord's command and bowing down to him with joined palms, O Parikshit, Prahlada, of sinless mind, the generalissimo of all the Asura forces, walked round the most ancient person in parikrama, and, permitted by him, withdrew to the subterranean world, following Bali. Thereupon Lord Vishnu, who takes away the sins of his devotees and who has his abode in water, O Raja, spoke as follows to the sage Ushana. This is Shukracharya, the Asura Guru, sitting near at hand in the midst of the other priests in the assembly of rishis who were exponents of the Veda. O Brahmana, accomplish whatever has been left incomplete by your disciple when performing the yajna. Whatever is found lacking in rituals is made up when noticed by a Brahmana. Shukra replied, since they were in the middle of performing this yajna portion of the Ashvamedha when Vamana arrived and interrupted the whole proceedings, of course, with this story. So he's telling him to complete the yajna. Shukra replied, how could there be any defect in the sacrificial performance of one by whom you, the prompter of actions and the lord of sacrifices, the deity presiding over sacrifices, have been propitiated with all his substance? The very chanting of your name neutralizes all defects relating to the correct intonation of mantras, procedure, time and place of sacrifices, as well as any defects relating to the priests or the material used. Nevertheless, since it is you who are saying so, O infinite Lord, I shall do your bidding. To obey your command, this constitutes the highest good of men. Sri Shuka continued, gladly accepting in these words the behest of Sri Hari, the glorious sage Ushana, with the help of other Brahmana sages, accomplished what was wanting in the sacrificial performance of Bali. Having thus begged the earth that had been usurped by his enemies, Lord Sri Hari, disguised as a dwarf, gave them back to his elder brother, the mighty Indra. For the gratification of the sage Kashyapa and Aditi, as well as for the welfare of all created beings, Brahma, the lord of Prajapatis, together with the Devas, Rishis, Pitris, and the Manus, as well as with Daksha, Bhrigu, Angira, and others, the Prajapatis, the sage Sanat Kumara and Lord Shiva, the source of the universe, made the divine dwarf Vamana, the lord of the worlds and their guardians. For the prosperity of all, he further made Lord Vamana, the younger brother of Indra, the custodian of the Vedas, as well as of all the devas, of dharma, wealth and fame, of blessings and sacred vows, of heaven and final moksha, capable as he was to protect them all. This is why in the account of the Manvantaras, the current Manvantara, since this story occurred in the present Manvantara, Vamana is the Manvantara avatar, the one that occurred in this Manvantara and the presiding avatar of this Manvantara. On that occasion, all created beings rejoiced much, O protector of human beings. Then, permitted by Brahma the creator, Indra, along with the other guardians of the worlds, placed the divine dwarf before him and actually took him in a heavenly car to Svarga. Having recovered all the three worlds, Indra, whose fear was gone, protected as he was by the arms of Lord Vamana, his younger brother, was invested with supreme glory and rejoiced. Brahma, Lord Shiva, the destroyer of the universe, and Sanat Kumara, sages headed by Bhrigu, a protector of men, the Pitris, and all other created beings, the Siddhas, and whatever heavenly beings there were, returned each to his own sphere, celebrating the aforesaid extraordinary and most wonderful deed of Lord Vishnu, and extolled Aditi as well. All the story of Lord Vishnu of wide strides, which takes away the sins of those who listen to it, has been narrated to you, O delight of your race. The mortal who presumes to describe the fullest extent of the glory of Lord Vishnu who took long strides must as well be said to have counted the particles of dust of the globe. In other words, it is impossible to describe the fullest extent of the glory of Lord Vishnu. Can any mortal born or going to be born reach the end of the glory of that perfect person? So says the Rishi Vasishta. Whosoever hears this story of the avatarana of Sri Hari, the god of gods of marvelous deeds, attains the highest state. In the course of whatever religious performance intended to propitiate the gods, the Pitris, or any human being, such as one's own guru, this story will be repeatedly recited by the performers. The wise declare that performance of theirs as well executed. Thus ends the 23rd discourse, comprised in the story of the avatarana of the divine dwarf in Book 8 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 24, the story of the descent of the divine fish, recounted. The Raja submitted, O divine sage, I wish to hear the story of the first avatarana of Sri Hari, whose exploits are marvelous, in which he appeared and behaved as a fish by his wonderful creative energy. Be pleased to tell us precisely the reason why, like one subject to karma, the Almighty Lord assumed the form of a fish, detested in the world because of its being tamasika by nature, and fierce, and everything connected with that avatarana, a venerable sage. The stories of Lord Vishnu of excellent renown are conducive to the happiness of the worlds. Sutta resumed. So Sutta, not Shuka, we're zooming out another narrator. Requested thus by Parikshit, the all-knowing sage Shuka, the son of Veda Vyasa or Badarayana, recounted the deeds of Lord Vishnu performed by him as manifested in the form of a fish. Sri Shuka resumed, the Almighty Lord actually assumes forms when seeking the protection of cows, the Brahmanas, the gods, and the righteous, and the Vedas too, as well as of dharma and whatever is worth seeking. Functioning in creatures high and low, the Lord, like the air, does not acquire a high or low status, occasioned by the modes of Prakriti, because of his being devoid of the gunas. At the end of the previous kalpa, there came about an occasional dissolution of the universe, consequent on Brahma's retiring to bed. In other words, the night of Brahma that occurs between kalpas. At that time, the worlds, including the earth, were washed away by the ocean, O protector of men. The powerful Hayagriva, not referring to Hayagriva avatar, but referring to the demon by the same name, who was nearby, stole away by dint of yoga or powerful concentration of mind the Vedas, which, while being repeated by Brahma, had escaped from the mouths of Brahma, the creator, who was inclined to go to bed, overcome as he was by sleep under the influence of time at the close of his day. Perceiving that action of Hayagriva, the Danava chief, the Almighty Lord Sri Hari assumed the form of a fish. In that kalpa, the kalpa that was at that time coming to an end, there was a certain royal sage, Satyavrata by name, an exalted soul devoted to Lord Narayana. He was practicing austerity, subsisting on water alone. That very Raja, who was called Satyavrata at that time, was known as Sradhadeva, son of Vivasvan, the sun god, in the present kalpa, and was exalted to the position of Manu by Sri Hari. But at this time, he was not yet Manu. One day, an unknown fish appeared in the water held in the hollow of the palms of Satyavrata, who was offering handfuls of water on the bank of the Kratamala River in South India. So he was scooping up 2 handfuls of water as part of a ritual, going to pour it back into the river. This is a really common ritual. And there was a tiny fish that he scooped up. Satyavrata, who ruled over the Dravida territory in South India, proceeded to drop along with the water the fish contained in the hollow of his palms back into the water of the river, O scion of Bharata. The fish most pitifully said to that monarch, highly compassionate as he was, wherefore do you throw me in the water of this river, O Raja, who are so kind to the afflicted, helpless as I am and afraid of aquatic creatures that kill their own species? Not knowing the Lord, who had lovingly assumed the form of a fish in order to shower his grace on himself, Satyavrata made up his mind to protect the fish. On hearing the very pitiful appeal of the fish, the said merciful ruler of the earth put it in the water of the vessel he had brought with him and took it to his ashrama. Growing in that kamandalu, the water pot, in the course of a single night, however, and not finding enough space in it, the fish actually said to the king as follows, I am not able to live in this kamandalu, even with difficulty. Find a sufficiently extensive abode in which I may comfortably live. Removing it from the kamandalu, he placed it in the water of a pitcher. Thrown into it, the fish grew to a size of 3 cubits in the course of less than an hour, and said, this water jar is not sufficient for me to live in at ease, O Raja. Let me have spacious accommodation, since I have sought you as my refuge. Having been removed from the water jar, the fish was thrown by the Raja into a good pond, O Parikshit. The same fish grew to be a monstrous fish and covered the lake with its body, and said, the water of this lake, O Raja, is not to my comfort. Put me in a lake containing inexhaustible water with adequate arrangements for my sustenance during the transit. Thus spoken to, the Raja took the fish by turns to a number of lakes of inexhaustible water, but finding it equal in size to each lake, transferred it to the ocean. While being led to the ocean, the fish spoke to him as follows, Mighty Makaras and other creatures in this ocean may eat me, O valiant monarch. You should not leave me here. Thus deluded by the fish that spoke such charming words, the Raja said, Who are you, bewitching us in the form of a whale? No aquatic creature possessed of such power as you has been seen or heard of by us, you who have grown in a day large enough to cover the whole lake 800 miles in extent. You are undoubtedly the immortal Lord Narayana himself, the destroyer of sins, who have assumed the form of an aquatic creature in order to shower your grace on created beings. Hail to you, O Supreme Person, controlling the functions of creation, maintenance, and dissolution. You are the true self as well as the goal of us, your devotees, that have sought you. All your sportful avataranas are conducive to the welfare of living beings. But I wish to know the particular purpose for which this form has been assumed by you. It is not futile to take shelter under your feet, O lotus-eyed Lord, as it is to approach the feet of those who are identified with the body, you being the disinterested friend, the beloved self of all, as evident from the fact that you have revealed your wonderful form to us, your devotees. Sri Shuka continued, To Raja Satyavrata, who had spoken thus, the Lord of the universe, who desired to sport in the ocean for the dissolution of the universe at the end of the Kalpa, and had accordingly assumed the form of a fish, who sought to do a good turn to the Raja, fond as he is of those exclusively devoted to him, said, On the 7th day following today, O subduer of foes, these three worlds, Bhuloka, the Bhuvarloka, and Svarga, will be submerged in the ocean, rising for the dissolution of the universe. When the three worlds are actually going to be submerged in the deluge water, a mysterious and spacious boat sent by me will approach you. Take in the meanwhile all the herbs and annual plants, as well as the seeds of all types, and surrounded by the Saptarishis and accompanied by all animals, you shall board that commodious vessel and sail about undaunted in that undivided expanse of water, devoid of light, guided by the effulgence of the rishis alone. Attached to that vessel, tossed about by a mighty gale, by means of the great serpent, to my horn, as I shall be present by your side. Pulling you boat and all, along with the rishis, I shall roam about in the vast expanse of water as long as the night of Brahma lasts, O Raja, and you will realize my glory, designated by the name of Parabrahma, revealed by me in your heart through your questions, though actually imparted by my grace. Having thus instructed the Raja Satyavrata, Sri Hari disappeared, while the Raja awaited the time with which Lord Vishnu, the controller of our senses, had told him. Spreading on the ground blades of the sacred kusha grass with their ends pointing towards the east, the royal sage sat down with his face turned towards the northeast, contemplating on the feet of Lord Sri Hari disguised as the divine fish. Then was the ocean clearly seen rising high on account of huge clouds pouring down heavy rain and overflowing its limits and inundating the earth on all sides. Revolving in his mind the command of the Lord, the king perceived the vessel arrived. Taking the herbs and plants, which he had ordered collected for the course as much as possible over the course of the week, he boarded it, along with the great sages. The sages, the Saptarishis, lovingly said to him, Meditate on Lord Vishnu, O Raja. He will surely deliver us from this calamity and bring happiness. Thought of uninterruptedly by the Raja, the Lord then appeared in that vast expanse of water, in the form of a golden and effulgent whale possessed of a horn, and extending over an area of 1,00,000 yojanas. Fastening the boat to the horn of the divine whale, with the king of serpents for a rope, as already enjoined by Sri Hari, King Satyavrata, full of joy, hymned Lord Madhusudana. The Raja prayed, People whose true knowledge of their own self stands obscured by dateless ignorance and who are exhausted by the toils and turmoils of worldly existence, traceable to that nescience, realize you here when they take shelter in you by your unaccountable grace. Such as you are, may you act as our highest guru and prove to be the bestower of final moksha. This ignorant jiva, bound by its own karma, performs actions with great pains in the hope of attaining happiness, and is able to get rid of that hope as well as of its wrong notion through your worship. May that Lord, who is our guide, snap our knot of ignorance existing in the heart. Through his worship can an embodied soul shake off its impurity in the shape of ignorance and regain its essential character, even as silver and gold shed their impurity and regain their native brilliance through contact with fire. In other words, how you can smelt out the impurities of gold and silver ore by raising it to enough heat. May that immortal Lord, who is higher than a guru, be our real guru. Gods, gurus, and other people joined together cannot by themselves show to a worshipper grace which is equivalent to 1 out of 10,000 parts of his. It is that Almighty Lord and you whom I seek as my refuge. An unenlightened soul chosen as a preceptor in relation to an ignorant person is of the same worth as a sightless person appointed as a guide in relation to another blind man. By us who are eager to know the truth relating to the self, you yourself have been elected as our guru. You who are not only self-illumined like the sun, but also impart light to all the senses of perception. A worldly soul imparts to another unwise counsel, by which he is sure to enter darkness, which is hard to overcome. You, however, impart undecaying and unfailing wisdom, through which the jiva easily realizes its essential character. Indeed, to the whole world, you are the disinterested friend, beloved, and inner controller, the self, the teacher, wisdom, and the realization of desired objects. Yet, having deep-rooted desires and possessed of an undiscerning intellect, the world does not know you, though you are present in the heart. Such as you are, I approach you, the Almighty Lord, adorable to gods, and worthy of being sought for instruction. Cut asunder, O Lord, with your words throwing light on the truth, the knots existing in the heart, and reveal your own self. Sri Shuka went on, sporting in that vast expanse of water in the form of a whale, Lord Vishnu, the most ancient person, taught the truth to the Raja when he had thus prayed. He revealed to the royal sage Satyavrata in its entirety the mystery of his own self in the form of a divine collection of Pauranika lore called the Matsya Purana, the Purana revealed by Matsya, the fish, dealing with Sankhya philosophy, which teaches us how to differentiate between Prakriti and Purusha, yoga, and rituals. Seated on board the vessel with the Saptarishis, the Raja listened to the discourse on the truth of the self, which is the same as the eternal and infinite Brahman, delivered by the Lord in the form of the divine Matsya, so as to leave no doubt. Having already killed the demon Hayagriva and recovered the Vedas, Matsya restored the Vedas to Brahma the creator when the latter rose from his slumber at the end of the Pralaya that immediately preceded the current Kalpa, which is the Shvetavaraha Kalpa. The same Raja Satyavrata, who was endued with spiritual knowledge and wisdom by the grace of Lord Vishnu, figures in the present Kalpa as the Vaivasvatamanu, or figured in past tense, as the Vaivasvatamanu, so called because he was born as the son of Vivasvata, the sun god, Vivasvan. He was also called Sradhadeva Manu. A man is rid of all sin by hearing this great story consisting of the dialogue between the Raja Rishi Satyavrata and Lord Vishnu, the wielder of the bow made of horn, disguised as a fish through his creative energy. He who recites from day to day the story of that which is spoken of as the avatarana of Sri Hari in the form of the whale attains to the supreme state, and his desired objects are accomplished. I bow to that Lord, the cause of all, disguised in the form of a whale, who, roaming in the deluge waters, restored the body of Sruti texts stolen away from the mouths of the Creator, whose powers lay dormant after slaying the demon, and who taught the Purana dealing with Brahma to Raja Satyavrata and the Saptarishis. Thus ends the 24th discourse entitled The Story of the Avatarana of the Divine Fish, recounted in Book 8 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita, composed by the sage Veda Vyasa and consisting of 18,000 shlokas. And that is the end of Book 8. And we will start in on Book 9. So, Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 9, Discourse 1, is on the story of King Sudyumna, son of Vaivasvatamanu. The Raja submitted the accounts of all the Manvantaras, as well as of the heroic deeds performed in them by Sri Hari of unlimited prowess, have been heard by me as told by you. I have heard from you that the same royal sage, Satyavrata, the then ruler of the Dravida territory, who attained spiritual enlightenment through devotion to Sri Hari, the Supreme Person, at the end of the previous Kalpa, was born as a son of Vivasvan, the sun god, and became Manu in the present Manvantara. The names of his sons, Ikshvaku and other kings, told by you, have also been heard. To us who are indeed ever eager to hear you, O holy Brahmana, narrate their line, as well as the doings of those belonging to that line, O highly blessed one. Recount to us the deeds of valor of all those Rajas of sacred renown, those who have gone by, those who will follow, and those who are ruling at present. Sutta resumed. Thus requested by King Parikshit in that assembly of exponents of the Vedas, the divine Shuka, who is well versed in the cult of devotion, proceeded to speak. Sri Shuka began again. Hear an account of the posterity of Vaivasvatamanu in its important aspects, O chastiser of foes. It cannot be narrated in full, even in the course of hundreds of years. During the period of Pralaya, Lord Narayana, the Supreme Person, alone, the inner controller and sustainer of all created beings, high and low, represented this universe. Nothing else existed at that time. Then from his navel sprang up the calyx of a golden lotus, and in that calyx, O Maharaja, appeared the four-faced Brahma, the self-born. From the latter's mind came forth Marichi, and from Marichi again appeared the sage Kashyapa. And of Kashyapa, by Aditya, daughter of Daksha, was born a son, Vivasvan, the sun god. Of the latter, by his wife Sangnya, O scion of Bharata, was born Sradhadeva, the Manu, presiding over the current Manvantara. And through his wife Sradha, the high-minded king Sradhadeva begot 10 sons, Ikshvaku, Nraga, Sharyati, Dishta, Drashta, Karushaka, Narishyanta, Prashadra, Nabhaga, and Kavi. In the beginning, before Ikshvaku and the others were born, the glorious and powerful sage Vasishta, the preceptor of the Suryavanshi, of the solar race, it is said, conducted a sacrifice in propitiation of the Devas Mitra and Varuna for the sake of a son to the Manu who was yet issueless, because the Sruti recommends the performance of a yajna in honor of the Devas Mitra and Varuna for those who desire to have a son. During that sacrificial performance, the Manu's wife, Sradha, who was subsisting on milk alone for the days of the yajna, approached the priest, invoking the Devas and reciting the Rig Veda, and falling prostrate before him, humbly requested him to conduct the sacrifice in such a way as to ensure the birth, not of a son, but a daughter. On the oblation being poured into the sacred fire, having been taken in the hand, so he had picked up the oblation and was about to offer it, the Brahmana officiating as the Hota priest, who was thinking all the time of the request made by the queen, and repeating the mystic word Vashata, propitiated the fire with a fully controlled mind by means of that oblation as directed by the Adharyu, another priest. Due to the aforesaid deviation made by the Hota, the offspring turned out to be a daughter, who was named as Ila. Not much pleased at heart to see her, the Manu submitted to his guru, the sage Vasishta. O glorious sage, how has this ritual conducted by you, exponents of the Veda, yielded such a contrary result? Oh, what a pity! Such a reversal of the fruit of the Vedic mantras should not have taken place. You are well versed in the mantras and disciplined, and have your impurities burnt by austerities. How could this frustration of your purpose be expected as untruth in gods? On hearing this question of Vaivasvatamanu, the glorious sage Vasishta, the grandfather of my grandfather, is how Shuka referred to him, because Shuka is the son of Vedavyasa, who was the son of Parashara, who was the son of Shakti, who was Vasishta's son, came to know of the deviation made by the Hota, and replied to Sradhadeva, "This frustration of your purpose in seeking a son as heir has been brought about by the contrary intention of the Hota, who deliberately used the mantra for a daughter. Yet by virtue of my own spiritual glory, I shall confer on you the privilege of having the good male progeny that you sought." Thus resolved, O Raja, the glorious sage Vasishta of extraordinary fame extolled Lord Vishnu, the most ancient person, with the desire of transforming Ila into a male child. Pleased with him, the almighty Lord Srihari bestowed on the sage Vasishta the desired boon. Thereby Ila, the daughter of Vaivasvata Manu, became Sudyumna, the foremost of men. Taking up a charming bow and most wonderful arrows, and protected by a kavach and armor, and surrounded by a few followers, the hero Sudyumna rode a hunting on one occasion, O Maharaja, through a forest on a horse of the Saindhava breed, peculiar to Sindha, and proceeded in pursuit of a game in a northerly direction. The aforesaid prince, it is said, entered a forest at the foot of Mount Meru in Ilavratavarsa of Jambudvipa, where Lord Rudra was carrying on amorous sports with his divine spouse, the goddess Uma. The moment Sudyumna, the slayer of hostile warriors, made his way into that forest, he found himself a woman and his horse a mare, a protector of human beings. Similarly, all his followers felt disconcerted to see the transformation of their sex and stared at one another. The Raja submitted, "How could there be a land possessed of such a potency? And by whom was it rendered such, O worshipful sage? Answer fully this question, great is our curiosity." Sri Shuka continued. Once upon a time, sages of sacred vows repaired to that land of Ilavratavarsa in order to see Lord Shiva, driving away, who sometimes lives there as kind of a pleasure ground where he goes with Uma, away from Mount Kailasa, driving away darkness as well as light from the quarters by their superior light. Much abashed to see them, goddess Parvati, who was uncovered or naked at that time, sprang immediately from the lap of her consort Lord Shiva and put on her raiment. Observing the fond sexual union of the couple engaged in such sports, the sages too withdrew from that forest to give them privacy and proceeded to the hermitage of the divine sages Nara and Narayana. Thereupon, in his eagerness to please his beloved spouse, who was disturbed in mind, Lord Shiva uttered the following: "Whatever male enters this forest reserve shall become a woman." From that time onward, indeed, males shunned that forest. So Sudyumna, for his part, who was transformed into a woman, roamed about from forest to forest in company of her attendants. Perceiving that excellent young woman roaming in the precincts of his hermitage, surrounded by other women, the glorious god Buddha, son of the moon god, who presides over the planet Buddha, which we call Mercury, conceived a passion for her. That pretty damsel of charming brows also in her turn coveted the said son of Raja Soma for her husband. And they begot a son, Pururava, that Buddha begot through her. Having thus attained the form of a woman, King Sudyumna, son of Vaivasvata Manu, remembered the sage Vasishta, the guru of his race, so we have heard. Thought of by her and instantly appearing in person before her by dint of yoga, the sage was sore oppressed with pity to see that changed condition of Sudyumna, and desiring the latter's restoration to manhood, approached Lord Shankara. Pleased with the sage, and in order to secure his gratification and to justify his utterance, the Lord Shankara spoke as follows: "O protector of the people, Sudyumna, born in the family of your proteges, shall be a male for 1 month and a female during another by turns. Let him protect the earth with pleasure according to this arrangement. Having regained manhood, the object of his desire, by the grace of his guru, Sudyumna protected the earth. However, the people did not approve of him. 3 sons, he was an unpopular king. 3 sons, Utkala, Gaya, and Vimala, were born to him, O Parikshit. They became rulers of the southern region, the Deccan, and were lovers of virtue. Then, in the ripeness of time, King Sudyumna, the ruler of Pratishtana, so that's the name of his city, The town still exists in India today. It's called Dhusi. It's close to Prayaga at the confluence of the Ganga and Yamuna, but instead of being between the two rivers, it's on the other side of the Ganga. Retired to the forest, relinquishing the sovereignty of the earth in favor of his son Pururava, begotten by Buddhadeva. Thus ends the fourth discourse, forming part of the story of Ila in Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 2, the posterity of Karusha and the other four sons of Vaivasvatamanu. Sri Shuka resumed, on his son Sadyumna having thus left, Vaivasvatamanu, desirous of another son, practiced asceticism on the banks of the Yamuna for 100 years. Then the Manu worshipped the Almighty Lord Sri Hari for the sake of progeny, and got 10 sons, resembling himself, the eldest being Ikshvaku. Of these, the Manu's son Prashadra, however, who had been made a cowherd by his guru, the sage Vasishta, tended cows at night, full of vigilance, and keeping awake as a rule in a standing posture, sword in hand, since his guru had tasked him with guarding his cows at night, the guru's cows. On one occasion at night, while it was raining, a tiger entered the cow pen, and the cows that were resting started up and full of panic ran about in the pen. The powerful beast seized one, and stricken with fear, the cow uttered a piercing cry. Hearing that scream of the cow, Prashadra, it is said, rushed forth with impetuosity, and taking his sword, unwittingly cut off the head of the red-brown cow, mistaking it for the tiger in the dark. The tiger, too, that had been struck with the end of the sword and had one of its ears severed, escaped from that place in extreme fear, dropping blood on the way. Prashadra, the slayer of hostile warriors, who believed the tiger to be dead, was filled with grief when he saw at the close of night the cow killed by himself. On him, even though he had unintentionally committed the sin of slaying a cow, and ordinarily what would be done if you accidentally slew a cow in Vedic society is that you would perform an expiatory rite. But the sage Vasishta, his guru, was very upset and uttered the following curse. Due to this, you shall no longer remain a vile kshatriya, but shall become a shudra. Cursed by his guru in these words, the hero Prashadra silently accepted the imprecation with joined palms, and remaining a lifelong celibate, observed a vow of strict continence, which is dear to ascetics. Friendly and alike to all created beings, he exclusively fixed his mind through devotion on the Supreme Lord Vasudeva, the Universal Spirit, free from all blemish. Having entirely given up attachment and fully controlled his senses, having no possession worth being called such, in other words, just the bare necessities of life, and maintaining his body by means of food, etc., got by chance, he fixed his mind on the self and roamed about on this earth, tranquil of mind, sated through wisdom, and fully composed, though presenting the appearance of a stupid, blind, or deaf fellow. Conducting himself in this manner and withdrawing to a forest, Prashadra saw a wildfire raging. He allowed his body to be consumed by it and attained oneness with the transcendent absolute. Kavi, the youngest son of Vaivasvatamanu, who was also free from all craving for the pleasures of sense, quitted his kingship as well as his kinsfolk while still tender of age, and installing in his mind the self-effulgent Supreme Person, he too retired into the forest and entered the Supreme. From Karusha, another of the sons of Vaivasvatamanu, the families of the Kshatriyas known as the Karushas took their descent. Devoted to the Brahmanas and lovers of Dharma, they became rulers of the northern regions. From Drishta sprang up the Kshatriya line called the Dharshtas, who attained Brahmanhood on this earth. So they changed from Kshatriyas to Brahmins. Nriga's son was Sumati, and Sumati's son was Bhuta Jyoti, and from Bhuta Jyoti, Vasu was born. From Vasu sprang up Pratika, and Pratika's son was Oghavan, who was the father of a son by his same name, Oghavan. A daughter too, Oghavati by name, was born of Oghavan. it's a little bit I guess when we're saying a daughter too, probably from the Oghavan the first, she was born. Sudarshana married her. Chitrasena sprang up from Narishyanta, and Daksha was the son of Chitrasena. The son of Daksha was Midvan, of whom Kurcha was born, and Indrasena was the son of Kurcha. Vitihotra was born of Indrasena, whose son was Satyasrava. Urusrava was the son of Satyasrava, and Devadatta was born of Urusrava. From Devadatta sprang up a son, Agniveshya, who was no other than the glorious Agni, the god of fire, in an avatar. It was he who came to be known as the great seer Kanina or Jatukarnya. From Agniveshya originated the race of the Brahmanas called the Agniveshyayanas, O protector of men. The posterity of Narishyanta has thus been told. Now hear of the line of Dishta. So we're going back to Dishta, one of the sons of Vaivasvatamanu. Dishta's son Nabhaga, who is other than the one going to be mentioned hereafter, so in other words, one of his sons, was degraded to the position of a Vaishya on the ground of his pursuits. In other words, that he preferred to live Vaishya dharma rather than Kshatriya dharma, and so he became a Vaishya. His son was Bhalananda, of whom Vatsyapriti was born. Vatsapriti's son was Pranshu. The learned remember his son as Pramati. Of Pramati, Kanitra was born. From Kanitra sprang up Chakshusha, and from Chakshusha, Viminshati. Viminshati's son was Rambha, whose son was the virtuous Kaninetra. Karandhama, O Maharaja, was the son of the last named, of Kaninetra, O protector of human beings. His son was Avikshit, whose son Marutta became an emperor, the same Marutta whom the great yogi Samvarta, son of the sage Angira, helped to perform a sacrifice. No sacrificial performance of anyone else was so grand as that of Marutta. Every utensil, etc., was actually of gold, and whatever else there was in his sacrifice was commendable. In that sacrifice, Indra, the ruler of the Devas, felt inebriated by the draughts of the Soma juice, and the Brahmanas were sated with gifts of money. The 49 Maruts, or wind gods, performed the duty of serving up food to the invitees. So in person, the 49 Maruta Devas were there, serving food to the guests, while the class of gods known as the Vishvedevas took part in the deliberations of the assemblies. Dama was the son of Maruta, and Rajyavardhana, the son of Dama. Sudhriti was born as the son of Rajyavardhana, and the son of Sudhriti was Nara, also called Saudhriteya. His son was Kevala, of whom Bandhuman was born, and from the latter sprang up Vegavan. His son was Bandhu, of whom the famous king Tranabindu was born. A heavenly damsel, or a Apsara, Alambusha, the foremost of the Apsaras, chose for her husband, Tranabindu, who was a repository of qualities worth acquiring. From their union were born a number of sons as well as a girl, Iravida. Through her, the sage Visrava begot a son in the person of the god Kubera, the lord and bestower of riches, after receiving the highest knowledge of the self from his father, the sage Pulastya, who was a mind-born son of Brahma and a master of yoga. Vishala, Shunyabandhu, and Dhumraketu were the sons of Tranabandhu. Of them, Vishala, who became a king and continued the ancestral line, built the famous city of Vaishali. Hemachandra was the son of Vishala, and Dhumraksha, the son of Hemachandra. Of Dhumraksha's son, Sanyama, was born Krishashva, along with his younger brother Devaja. From Krishashva sprang up Somadatta, who, having propitiated the Supreme Person, the Lord, the bestower of the fruit of sacrifices, through multiple horse sacrifices, and depending on the Lord, the master of all yogas, attained the highest goal, the divine state of moksha. Sumati was the son of Somadatta, and Sumati's son was Janamejaya. These were the rajas born in the line of Vishala, who preserved the glory of Trinabindu. Thus ends the second discourse in Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 3, the story of the sage Chavana and his wife Sukanya and the posterity of Raja Sharyati. So continuing with the various vast royal genealogies, Sri Shuka resumed, Raja Sharyati, another son of Vaivasvatamanu, they say, was a master of the highest truth forming the subject matter of the Vedas. It was he who authoritatively advised the ritualistic course of the second day at the sacrifice performed by the scions of the sage Angira. His daughter, Sukanya by name, had eyes beautiful as a pair of lotuses. Gone to the forest one day with that girl, indeed, he happened to visit the ashrama of the sage Chavana. So he and his daughter visited that ashram together. Remarking the trees in a grove at that ashrama, surrounded by her girl companions, she perceived in the hole of an anthill a pair of bright things like two fireflies. Impelled by destiny, the girl and her childish innocence actually pricked the two bright things with a thorn, and a good deal of blood flowed from them. That very moment there ensued on this side the obstruction of stool and urine among the troops. Astonished to discover this, the royal sage spoke to his men, has any injury been wrought by you to the sage Chavana, son of Bhrigu? Obviously his hermitage has been profaned by someone amongst us. Seized with fear, Sukanya, Sharyati's daughter, submitted to his father, something wrong has been done by me. Ignorant as I was, two bright things have certainly been pierced by me with a thorn. Fear having been roused in him, on hearing that report, Raja Sharyati gradually propitiated the sage, buried underneath an anthill, since she had in fact pricked him. Coming to know of the latter's mind, the Raja gave away his daughter to the sage. So, saved from the scrape, he asked leave of the sage and returned to the capital more cautious than before. Having obtained the most irascible sage, Chavana, for her husband, Princess Sukanya, who had come to know his mind and was careful, tried to please him with her services. After the lapse of some time hence, the two Ashvini Kumaras, the celestial physicians, called at his ashrama. Receiving them with respect, the sage submitted, capable as you are, bestow youth on me. I shall bear you both a cup of that juice, even though I know you are not entitled to a potation of the soma juice in a sacrifice. Be pleased, therefore, to make my age and exterior such as may be coveted by young women. Gladly accepting his prayer, the two foremost physicians of the Devas said to the Brahmana, the sage Chavana, plunge you into this pool created by the Siddhas. Chavana, whose body was stricken with old age and who was covered all over with protuberant veins, who was forbidding on account of his wrinkles and gray hair, was made to enter the pool by the twin Ashvini Kumaras after they had spoken in these words. There emerged from the pool 3 very lovely males of like appearance, captivating to women, adorned with wreaths of lotuses and earrings of gold and finely dressed. Finding them possessed of similar forms and a luster resembling that of the sun, and failing to recognize which of them was her husband, because the two Ashvini Kumaras who entered the pool and submerged in the water with him granted him a form visually identical to their own. That virtuous lady Sukanya of charming limbs sought the two Ashvins as her refuge, asking for their help. Pleased with her vow of fidelity, the two Devas showed her which one was her husband, and asking leave of the sage, returned by their aerial car to Svarga. Intending to perform a sacrifice, King Sharyati again visited the hermitage of the sage Chavana some time afterwards, and saw by the side of her daughter Sukanya a male possessing the effulgence of the sun. When she bowed at his feet, the Raja, who was not much pleased at heart, as it were, and did not pronounce his benedictions either, reproached his daughter. What is it that you intend to achieve, O vile lass? Your husband, a sage adored by the world, has been betrayed by you, and that having deserted him, stricken as he is with old age, and not liked by you, you wait upon this vagabond as a lover. How has your reason embraced a wrong conclusion, that bereft of shame, you harbor a paramour? This is indeed a stain on your family, O girl of noble pedigree. You will hurl the family of your father as well as that of your husband into Naraka. To the father, who was talking in this strain, that girl of innocent smiles smilingly replied, "Dear father, he is your son-in-law, the delight of the sage Bhrigu." She then related to her father the whole story, the way in which her husband had regained his youth and acquired a charming appearance. Astonished and supremely gratified, the Raja lovingly hugged his daughter. The sage Chyavana enabled the heroic king Sharyati to propitiate the Lord through a Soma sacrifice, and by dint of his ascetic power, bore a cup of the Soma juice to the two Ashwini Kumaras, even though they were not entitled to drink it. Full of indignation at this, Indra took up his thunderbolt to kill the sage. Chyavana, son of the sage Bhrigu, paralyzed the arm of Indra holding the thunderbolt. From that time forward, all the gods and others consented to a cup of Soma juice being given to the two Ashvins, who being physicians had heretofore been precluded from a share in the offerings of the Soma juice. Uttana Barhi, Anarta, and Bhurishena. These were the three sons of Sharyati. From Anarta sprang up Revata. Having built a city called Kushastali, which later would obtain the name of Dwaraka, in the heart of the ocean. When we say in the heart of the ocean, we mean on a peninsula, surrounded on three sides by the ocean. And ensconced in it, the latter ruled the Anarta and other territories, or subduer of enemies. The Anarta is a land which today is called Gujarat in India. 100 excellent sons, of whom Kakudmi was the eldest, were born of Revata. Taking his daughter Revati, Kakudmi went to Brahmaloka. So Revati and her father Kakudmi both went to Brahmaloka, which is uncovered by the sheaths of Rajas and Tamas, in order to ask Brahma about a match for the girl. As music was going on, Kakudmi failed to get an opportune moment to broach the matter and tarried a while. At the end of the musical performance, he bowed low to Brahma, the first created being, and spoke out his mind. Hearing his submission, the glorious Brahma heartily laughed and spoke to him as follows: "O Raja, whoever might have been thought of by you when you placed your foot here have all been swept off by time. We hear no more even of the races of their sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons. Time computed at the figure of 27 revolutions of all the 4 yugas have rolled by since you left. Therefore go. There is now the mighty Baladeva, a part manifestation of the supreme deity. Give away this jewel of a girl, O Kakudmi, to that jewel among men. For removing the burden of the earth, the Almighty Lord, the protector of created beings, the very hearing and chanting of whose glories and names is sanctifying, has descended along with his part manifestation, Lord Balarama." Thus instructed by and bowing to Brahma, the birthless one, the Raja Kakudmi returned to his capital, Kushastali, deserted for fear of yakshas by his brothers staying here and there. So in other words, his ancient capital city was just a deserted ruin haunted by spirits and no longer inhabited by humans. This is because time passes at different rates in different lokas. And because he entered Satyaloka not under divine auspices, the gods can sync up the time properly for you if they're careful to do so. But because he entered Satyaloka of his own accord, clearly having great power in order to do so, but not understanding the time differential problem, 27 rounds of the yugas passed while he was away. Giving away his daughter Revati of faultless limbs to the powerful Balarama, the Raja retired to the hermitage of the divine sage Narayana, known by the name of Badrikashrama, in order to practice austerities. And thus ends the third discourse in Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I'm thinking that might be a good place to stop. It's almost 10, and the next story gets into the story of the next discourse gets into the story of Raja Ambarisha, which is a slightly longer story that goes on for a while. So that might be good to do all in one piece at the start of next time.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much for coming. This one
Thank
was,
you, Devala.
yeah.
And a very happy Ekadashi to Andy and to you and everyone.
Yes, yes. Happy Ekadashi.
Happy
May God bless you guys.
Yes. Thank you.
Jai Shri
Okay.
Hari.
Jai
Jai
Thank
Shri
you,
Shri
Deva.
Krishna. Jai
Jai
Shri
Shri
Krishna.
Krishna.
Thank you. Bye-bye.